Dear friends, good evening. Welcome everyone. My name is Rick Santana. I am your instructor tonight for this session in your channel, Gnosis, Arizona. Our session tonight is titled The Secret Journey of the Soul. And this is an adaptation that we have taken from lessons learned on a topic that is called the Transmigration of the Soul. And this thing, Transmigration, before we move on, let's clarify it. That way we can flow through this material without having any type of misunderstanding. When we speak of transmigration, we are speaking about the journey of the essence. The essence is the consciousness. It is that psychic material that you and I have been given so that we can fabricate a soul, that we can fabricate a solar, radiant soul. That is what we must do. So transmigration is the journey of this essence, of this consciousness across kingdoms and bodies. And transmigration is part of the evolutionary processes of the consciousness. However, there is a point in which that process stops being what we could refer to colloquially as a reincarnation with purpose. And it becomes more a mechanical recycling of the essence. And for those of us who are here with these human bodies and we're listening to this, it is highly likely that we have been trapped in this mechanical recycling of the essence. I mean, some people may say, oh, whoa, wait, I am not the same person that I was last year. And you may be right. But that could also be the same thing that your soul has been saying for the last 4 million years. And we must make a change. I mean, I understand that there will be people, and there are people indeed, who are kind of reluctant to this idea of an evolutionary process of the soul that eventually becomes stagnant. And we get that. But what the masters tell us is that when people reject this teaching of this transmigration of the soul simply because they have become conditioned. They are used to the evolutionary theories of this dark age, dark iron age that we're living, that is called the age of Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is the age of Kali, and Kali among the Hindu is that manifestation of the eternal feminine that rules the catabolic forces of nature that operate in the underworld. So now that we're speaking about this, there are a few cosmic laws that govern us. These laws are the laws of the eternal return of all things and the law of recurrence. And in synthesis, these two laws are saying kind of the same thing, kind of different thing. They're both implying that everything is going to keep repeating itself until we break the loop. Here, the law of the eternal return says that everything is going to go back to its point of origin. That is what the law of return says. And we see this in tides. We see this in waves. We see the seasons that come and go. We see the phases of the moon. Even the dramas that we go through all the time, they are in a way moved by this eternal law of return of all things. But the law of recurrence is the one that takes place from the moment that you take your first breath. And the law of recurrence states that what happened before will happen once again, together with its consequences, the good ones and the bad ones. So the law of return brings us back to a new womb, and the law of recurrence brings about a repeat of the same dramas, the same tragedies and comedies that we have lived in past lives until we do something different so that we can transcend all of those dramas. Of course, if we do not awaken, as is the case of most of us, well, we're going to continue living and dying in autopilot, and we're going to be repeating these cycles unknowingly. So let's focus for a second on the law of the eternal return of all things. Because the great masters tell us 3 paths open before the deceased. Everyone who dies goes through a series of judgments, and they face 3 possible alternatives. The first one is a vacation in the superior worlds of creation. That is what we refer to as the heavens. The second path is to return, whether it is immediately or immediately, to a new womb. And the third one is to descend into the infernal worlds of nature. So let's take a quick look at these three paths so that you can understand. And with this, we will give you a beautiful preamble so that when we speak about the lecture, the lesson that is titled The Phenomenon of Death. So let's look at the three paths. When we speak of the heavens, we are referring to the regions of Nirvana. Notice that we say regions, more than one. These regions of Nirvana are regions of great happiness. And these are regions of creation. These are realms of nature that exist very high in the tree of life. And the essence is able to exist there, not as a citizen, but more as a visitor. And the consciousness can exist there after it abandons the ego. This thing, Nirvana, there is much that has been said about it. Let's see if we can complement what you may already know. Nirvana is a state associated with liberation from suffering. Any consciousness that enters the region of Nirvana, I said regions, but bear with me, it is here where their personal suffering will end. That is, again, because the consciousness will abandon the ego momentarily, temporarily, to exist within that realm. There is still a connection to the wheel of samsara. And after some time, that consciousness will come from that region of Nirvana and come back into a new womb. But we said regions. And there are two different realms of Nirvana. One is the Para-Nirvana, and the other one is the Maha-Paranirvana. Para-Nirvana speaks about total and final liberation. At that point, there is no more ego. There is no more karma. There is no more suffering. Those sincere seekers that become adepts and eventually become masters, they are capable of reaching a state of total and final liberation, and their being remains within an ineffable bliss. Some of them may choose to continue working for humanity and come once again voluntarily and receive a new physical body. Those masters will select the time, the place, as a consequence, the zodiacal influence that can bring the necessary forces for them to carry on their mission. And that is amazing, because these great masters take a great risk in a realm as tricky as this world is, and they have an opportunity to become something known as a Paramartasatya. Paramartasatyas are masters that have the absolute wisdom. They have the absolute knowledge. They have been able to integrate themselves beyond the Paranirvanic realms. If you think of a Paramartasatya, if you need an example, think of the master of all masters. That is Yeshua ben Pandira, that we know as Jesus of Nazareth. But those who are on a quest, and their being is moving them, and they eventually become Paramartasatyas, they can have access to the Maha-Paranirvana. This is a realm for all of those beings that have incarnated the cosmic Christ, and they have become masters of perfection, and beyond that, perfect masters. These are highly exalted beings that become absorbed in the pure, abstract, unknowable emptiness in that realm that is so far beyond the mind that we cannot even fathom, and any effort to explain it will always fall short. So that is why we said regions of Nirvana. But going back to this, the essence will abandon the ego, that consciousness will be there in that heaven and will be exposed to all of these realms to this realm where there is no personal suffering. And because of that, they can rejoin with their disembodied relatives. The time that they spend in heaven is so strong, it is so energizing for the consciousness that when they come back and they receive a new physical form, wow, those consciousness, they are moved only by the shock of the experience of that divinity. The masters say that there is a keynote that vibrates in the causal plane. That keynote and that vibration produces an ineffable joy in all of these. This thing that is referred to as the world of natural causes or the causal plane, this is the sixth dimension of nature. If you are familiar with the tree of life, this is known as the region of Tiferet. And of course, that region in the microcosmic man is symbolized by the heart. It is here where we see all these causal men. We say men because we're speaking in general terms, but these divine men and women, they are endlessly working for humanity. These are principalities. Here we find the archons of the law, the devas, or the elemental gods. We see archangels, we see malakim, etc., etc. And this realm is characterized by a very deep, intense hue of blue, a color that is very similar to the color of the night sky when it is illuminated by the moon. But eventually, all the reward is exhausted. Like the masters say, any reward has a limit, and the moment arrives when the soul that has entered those realms, that nirvana, they must come back, and they will inevitably descend and get back into the ego. And of course, that kind of soul then comes to impregnate the fertilized egg, and with that, form a new physical body and return to the world. It is then and there that now this being comes energized with a fresh new perspective and is more capable. But of course, this is something that we must earn. To be able to walk into those realms, there is work that we must do here and now. So what is the other path? The other path that awaits those who perish, who die, well, leads them to the infernal worlds. And those infernal worlds are structured in 9 distinct spheres. The people who go here are not necessarily bad people. The spheres of hell are not just spheres of punishment. And seeing hell as a punishment, it is a very superficial appreciation of its purpose. Those who have exhausted their time here on earth, those who have lived the number of lives that you and I are all given to achieve some self-realization, well, if that does not happen, then those consciousnesses must descend into the spheres of hell. But also, those people who are perverse, those who deliberately do wrong, those who seek to awaken instead of awakening in light, they choose to awaken in darkness, and for darkness itself, they end up in these spheres of hell. But the key thing is that these spheres, this realm is not a place of eternal pain and punishment. When this has been said, those who have said that, they have given humanity a cruel lie. Hell is not a place of eternal pain and punishment. It is a place of atonement. It is a space of purification. And as a consequence, it is a place that leads to a degree of enlightenment of the consciousness. The purpose of these realms of hell is to go through the experience of the second death. Of course, the first death is the death of the physical body. The second death is the death that the consciousness experiences as it sees all of its creations being pulverized, destroyed by the catabolic forces of nature. And so this is exactly why the time in the Averno, in hell, or if you are familiar with the Central American cultures, the Mictlan, as it is known among the Aztec, well, the time there is limited. But it is also painful for the consciousness. The creations of the consciousness, again, are destroyed by the very forces of nature themselves. But once this expiation is complete, that consciousness will emerge at the other side and it will assume a childlike figure, just like the childlike figures that you would see of the images of little angels. And as this essence emerges on the other side, the angels of the hierarchies of the moon, those are angels on the hierarchies of Archangel Gabriel, receive that essence, and after they receive it in their bosom and contemplate it, they certify that there is indeed no inferior creation, part of that consciousness, and release that consciousness so that it can experience once again the light of the sun. And then you and I, everyone else, we start the process of the evolution of the soul like a gnome or a pygmy of earth, like an elemental of the element of earth, and we enter the evolution in the mineral kingdom. So what happens when you and I have been, as an essence, as a consciousness, starting soon after seeing the light of the sun for the first time in God knows how long? What happens to us? Here in the mineral kingdom, as a consciousness, we share a common form. Many of these consciousness together share a common physicality. And that physicality, well, you can see it today as the minerals. It is extremely important for the consciousness to go through this process, because it is here that the consciousness learns of structure. It learns of order. It learns of balance. But it also learns of energy exchange. It also learns about transformation and collaboration as chemical reactions take place, as the minerals get exposed to the fire, to the water, to the air. Them as earth, well, they react, they enable formations of new compounds, and this is all part of that process of transmutation and transformation that is necessary for the consciousness to understand. These are all, of course, crucial teachings. But the time here is also limited. Eventually, the consciousness will achieve a degree of mastery that will enable it to, quote unquote, graduate. And the moment that happens, that essence transitions into the plant kingdom. Once the consciousness is in the plant kingdom, that consciousness is as an elemental, the soul of the plant itself. So when you are looking at the plant, what you're seeing is the physical body, and behind that physical body there is a soul that has gained already all of the wisdom in the mineral kingdom. And these souls, because they are esoteric practitioners, because they have learned about these forces, and they are being educated by divine beings, call them angels, that rule the different departments of the kingdoms of nature. They learn on how to affect the elements of nature and how to work with the forces of nature. In the plant kingdom, these souls, these consciousnesses, they can have direct interaction with other evolutionary monads. Imagine how a tree is by itself a universe to all of those microorganisms that exist within the tree itself. So as a micro-universe, a tree, as one of the manifestations in the plant kingdom, becomes a host to innumerable other souls that are in their different stages of evolutionary processes. As a plant, that soul learns to experience complex chemical reactions. They operate in ways where they have compartmentalized intelligence, because the cells in the plant, they all have organelles, and these organelles have different degrees of intelligence to complete different works. And the key thing here about the consciousness is that in the plant kingdom, that soul experiences its very first individuality. But as that soul goes through different stages of development in the plant kingdom, eventually it reaches the degree of mastery that allows it to graduate as well. And then it moves to become part of the animal kingdom. It cannot go from a plant into a very complex animal organism. It must start at the level of the most simple organisms. Because here, that soul is learning how to work with bodies that are more complex and that have different complex functions. It is in this stage where the soul itself can start integrating all of this wisdom that it got from the mineral kingdom, from the plant kingdom, and as it evolves in the animal kingdom, the wisdom that it gains as an animal, and this is all based on a cosmic law that is called the law of the Trogo-Oro-Egocrat. We know that that is a mouthful. But if we synthesize what that means, that is the cosmic law that states that everything will feed itself from everything else. Everything nourishes everything. And here in the animal kingdom, well, that soul gets its very first experience of physical motility. It learns how to move itself, how to not be stagnant, stuck in a single place. And as it does this, eventually, it reaches a degree of development where, as an animal, it can assume much more complex organic forms. And as it continues to evolve as a complex animal, this animal elemental has its first experience of what is known as emotion. With all of this wisdom up to this time, as you can imagine, that consciousness will reach a degree of mastery that will allow it to graduate. And when it graduates, then your divine mother, the divine mother of each one of us, will give us the gift of moving that consciousness into a physical form. And that is our first human incarnation. It is here where the human state is reconquered. Here, as humans, as we're growing, we start gaining experience of those things that are known as concept and intellect. So now we have experienced individuality, we have experienced emotion, now we're experiencing concept, now we're experiencing intellect, we're experiencing this ability to reason. We're becoming exceedingly capable as a being. But this time in the human form is limited. Each one of us is given only 108 lives with the purpose of achieving an intimate self-realization. 108 lives so that we can learn and master what is necessary here in terms of using our willpower, our thought, our sentiments, the use of the power and the power of our energy, of our creative power, so that we can make a transition beyond the human realm into the realm that is of an angelic nature. And once we're here, the law of recurrence starts bringing back prior experiences. And every subsequent life becomes a repeat of the previous one. Now, you and I are given 108 lives. But these lives will come in cycles. In reality, we are all given a maximum of 3,000 cycles of 108 opportunities, 108 lives. That means that after every completion of a cycle of 108, if we are not self-realized, that consciousness will be carrying so much burden with all of these inferior creations that it has not learned how to manage. We will go down through the spheres of hell, we will become purified once again, start again in the animal kingdom, and that will start another cycle. Once we get to the human form, 108 more lives, and if we don't complete it then, we once again descend and start once again to another cycle, this to a maximum of 3,000. And at the end of these 3,000 cycles, if there is no self-realization, every door closes. At that moment, that essence, that consciousness, does not grow any further than being an innocent elemental of nature. And as such, it returns to the great reality. It goes back to the great alaya of the universe. If we were to put that in perspective, going back to the great reality of all of creation, within that realm that exists beyond the Maha-Paranirvana, we would be the equivalent of a blade of grass. That's it. So the cosmic law will give us 108 chances in human form. So if we ignore 108 red flags, if we were an app, that app would have crashed. We would be rebooting somewhere else in the infernal hells, and we would be having to start all over again. One time there was one of the participants, they said, what does this mean? How much time is that? So if we look 3,000 cycles of 108 lives, that is a lot of lives. That is 324,000 lives, not counting the time that you will experience in the animal, plant, and mineral kingdom. So if we assume that every life would be on the average, like what we see today, of around 75 years, that adds up to the astonishing number of like 24 million years. That is not even taken in consideration everything that happens before you get your human bodies. But this is just to give you some perspective on what is it that this means. Because people who are living their last life today, they could have been in the mineral form back during the Miocene era. But they could have been minerals even before the Miocene era. It was back in the Lemurian race where we lost the ability to have our lives governed by that principle called the Fulanistanian principle. That principle that allowed those beings to live 1,200, 1,500 years. Today, we're governed not by the Fulanistanian, but by the Itoklanos principle. That is the principle that governs the life of the animals. Your life can end at any moment according to the decree of the law. So, that time, the Miocene era, 23 million years ago, that is when the grasslands were expanding. That's where we started seeing some mammalian diversity, the evolution of some apes. That is a long, long time ago. So you can see, when somebody tells you, if you have the consideration of being like an old soul, if you say, you're an old soul. You say that, you may be very right. So what about death? What about death then in all of this? Death is that phenomenon that resets or restarts that continual flow of these cosmic laws. We already know about return. We already know about recurrence, but there is also a law of reincarnation. And we would like to clarify that reincarnation is not for everyone. When you and I come back, we are returning into a new human form. Only the great masters can reincarnate, because reincarnation is a process that is voluntary. And for reincarnation to take place, there must exist true individuality. There must be a consciousness there that is not fractionated by the ego. When it comes to us, those of us with an ego, well, the ego comes back and reincorporates in new forms because of the law of return. But the key thing is that every time that we come back, every time that we as a soul go into a new physical form, there is a very subtle connection between the moment of death in the previous life and the instant of conception. And that phenomenon is called the electropsychic design. In this electropsychic design, you and I carry a vast amount of accumulated information. Everything that has to do with our inheritances, values, habits, traditions, customs, beliefs, fears, insecurities, etc., all of that is part of the electropsychic design. Those things together are associated with karma. Karma governs all processes of transmigration, and each form, as we come back, the consequences, the conditions are earned by our previous actions. So our individual karmas, our individual karma that leads us to be born in the nation in which we're born, karmas that lead in which world we're going to be born, like in this world that today we find ourselves incarnated. This is all part of the electro-psychic design. And all this information is encoded within us. I find this fascinating because there are maybe 3 billion, 3.2 billion base pairs in the human genome. And what we know today from our science is that each pair encodes 2 bits of data. So this is suggesting that if we discard everywhere where this data is repeated in our body, because we have an uncountable amount of cells, this is suggesting that there are approximately 800 megabytes of uncompressed data in the unique human genome. And that is enough information of your lives and my life to write more than 2,000 books of information. All this information is coded within those Akashic records of nature. All of our habits, traces of past personalities, all of this is completed at the time of death. And the moment that that angel of death severs the thread of Antakarana and your soul can no longer enter into the physical body, well, that digital information, that coding becomes written in the new fecundated egg, and it enters the fecundated egg at the time of conception. The image that we're showing you on the screen is capturing sparks of light. Let's see that light as fire, and this is happening inside the womb because this light is generated at the moment of conception. So here is when we see that electropsychic design taking place. But even though we go from one life to the next, knowing that we bring our ego from one life to the next, it is important to know that not all the egos come back into the same physical form. There are some egos that come and go through the astral world. They spend that time in that lower astral world where we see the souls of the dead roaming. And those are the ones that come back into the human form. But there are some egos that, because of our fears and attachments, they linger behind. Some of them remain stuck because of people. Some of them remain stuck in places. Some of them just remain stuck because of things, because they just cannot let go. And these are very crucial moments in life that we must be very watchful. Because if you ever heard of spells, that is what we do every time that we use the creative power of the word. And if you can imagine an instant where someone loses a loved one, and in their suffering, they say, "Why have you done this? Why don't you take me?" as they speak to divinity. When they, for example, look at their ailing child, and they say, "Don't worry. Mommy will never leave this place. I will never leave your side." There are egos that become affected by that spell. Egos of fear, of insecurity, all rooted in ignorance. And so there are many of these parts of us that have lingered behind because of our own attachments. Some others of these egos that will enter the plant kingdom. Some others of these egos, they could be so destructive for us that our Divine Mother, in her infinite kindness and mercy, she may send them to the underworld. I mean, you have heard about the work of the masters as they descend to the underworld to reconcile their work. We saw this in the story of Jesus. He descended to the underworld during those 3.5 days after he was taken down from the cross, and he descended to the underworld before his resurrection. In the Aztec tradition, Quetzalcoatl, which is the figure of the Christ for the Aztecs, he descends to the underworld based on their stories to retrieve the bones of his ancestors. So we must reconcile and bring back all of these fragments of consciousness that we have left everywhere so that we can reintegrate them. And some other egos, well, they're going to enter inferior matrices of the animal kingdom. This is kind of a lot to say. So what this could imply, what this may be suggesting is that there will be egos of ours, that they will enter lower levels of human cognition or human behavior, and they would incarnate as some other form, and they would be instruments of the lords of the law, the laws of karma, to bring karma to others. Some others would be incarnated in lower hierarchical structures within human societies so that they can experience, that consciousness can experience specific consequences and dramas. And some others can enter biological or evolutionary lower levels in like less evolved biologies, all with a purpose to give an opportunity of that consciousness to truly learn. And of course, the most perverse black magicians, those tenebrous that have awakened in darkness and for darkness. What the masters tell us is that they can live in the realms of hell for trillions of years before reaching that second death. The torment that those consciousnesses will go through is tremendous. But you and I, ordinary people, we can achieve that second death in like 800 to 1,000 years or so, and then emerge to the other side to once again start as a human form. So how do we stop all of these cycles of mechanical transmigration? Because remember, everything repeats itself until we break that loop. Well, it so happens that you and I can liberate ourselves from the wheel of samsara, but it requires conscious work. There has to be a call from the innermost. You must feel that fire in your heart so that you deliberately start working, eliminating anything and everything that is inferior within you. And this requires of inner death. This means that we have to see the elimination of our angers and our resentments, our vengeance, that we have to eliminate all of our lusts, that we must eliminate our pride, our vanity, our self-consideration, that we must eliminate our gluttony, our laziness, our envies, our jealousies, etc. All of this must go, because there is no place in heaven for these inferior aspects that are just born out of ignorance of the consciousness itself. So this requires conscious work. It requires of this work of elimination. And of course, we must be here to serve others, because sacrifice from others can free us from this process of transmigration. Sacrifice for others crystallizes within your environment the substance of sacrifice. And that substance itself becomes the canvas in which you can stencil, you can paint the magnus opus that is your life. So to liberate ourselves from this wheel of returns, we must embrace the guidance of our being. And part of our guidance, known as the laconic action of the being, comes with embracing the fundamentals of the super dynamic of love. Because that liberation accelerates when we learn to make the right use of our creative powers, particularly of our sexual creative powers. So what should we do today? We must safeguard that energy. We must safeguard it in the way that we use our words, in the way that we give our ears to what everyone else is doing, and the gossips and the politics and the dramas. We must learn how to spend and expend our energy. But we must also exercise loyalty. Loyalty to those that have entrusted us with their heart. We must show self-respect. And we must learn to transmute the lead of our personality into the gold of the Spirit. This transmutation, we see it by the great Master Jesus in his teaching, in the weddings of Cana, in that first public manifestation where he exercised that first public miracle, where in those weddings, in the celebration, they ran out of wine, and his mother asked for them to bring pure water to him. And the great master took the pure water and transformed the water into wine. I mean, you and I know how people behave when they get drunk. We cannot possibly believe that a master of perfection or a perfect master like Jesus is going to be giving people alcohol for them to behave the way the drunken people behave. So there is a teaching here because the lives of the masters are lived in symbols. And he is teaching us we must transmute the waters of our personality, the creative waters within us, into the wine of the Spirit. That is a fundamental alchemical teaching. For us to liberate, we must learn to live our life as if our life was a path of initiation, as if it is through every thought, sentiment, and action that we must demonstrate that we have reached the great degree of mastery. Friends, we have been able to source this material from different works, but we are just exceedingly grateful for your participation tonight. This has been The Secret Journey of the Soul, lessons learned from the Transmigration of the Souls. Dear friends, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. May all beings be happy.